Welcome back to Behavioral Science for Brands, a podcast where we bridge the gap between academics and practical marketing. Every week, we sit down and go deep behind the science of some of America's most successful brands. I'm MichaelAaron Flicker.
And I'm Richard Shelton.
And Richard and I are excited to share that our biggest collaboration yet is coming out later this month, September 30th, 2025, and it's called Hacking the Human Mind.
And the book looks at the world's best brands and the behavioral science principles they have used to power that success. We look at 17 brands and 30 behavioral science principles that they've harnessed.
And for us, we wrote it to be practical, insightful, and hopefully as fun to read as it was to write. Robert Cialdini said that he couldn't put it down.
And one of our former guests, Rory Sutherland, says it's a book for the ages. And one of the reasons why we're talking about this today is that the idea for the book came from this podcast.
And inspired by that, we said, what if we did a little mini series over the weeks coming up to the launch of the book, where we chose our favorite episodes that we originally discovered, made the podcast about because we were just felt that they had amazing applications of behavioral science in their marketing. And then let's a little bit of a shameless self-promotion. Let's re-bring these episodes back to our listeners, tell you why we loved it in the first place, but then tell you how we've built on it in the book that's coming out later this month. So we started with Dyson, we've done Pringles, and now we're moving on to Häagen-Dazs. And originally, we were fascinated by Häagen-Dazs's origin story, how they used fictitious words to imply more sophistication than maybe their Brooklyn roots might have gotten them without it, and then how they invented a category of luxury ice cream. So, Richard, help us set the stage here. What did we feature with Häagen-Dazs in the first place, and then how did we advance that in the book?
So in the podcast, we cover a few things. We talk about the power of from branding. So this is the idea that if you associate with a particular country, some of the attributes people have with that country will rub off on your brand. So you pick the right country to associate with, and it can boost perceptions of quality and likability. But one of the studies that we use to talk about the power of pre-existing associations to boost the actual experience of products, one of the studies we talk about was from Brian Wansink, and later investigations have shown that Brian Wansink actually, in some of his studies, made up the data. Now, it doesn't actually affect the study that we're talking about, but of course that casts a shadow of doubt over all his research. So what we did in the book was go a little bit further and look at whether or not this idea that the language that you use and the country that you associate with can set up positive expectations that then affect the experience of the product. We look at whether that is a genuine finding or a bogus one. And we look at research by Kara and Eichner that show this is an absolutely genuine idea. So this is something that marketers should be looking to apply. And then the other thing that we do is we extend beyond just foreign branding and look at words in general, how changing the label for a product, changing the name can have a massive effect on its appeal and whether or not people buy it. We talk about some classic research from Loftus and Palmer, but then we talk about probably my favorite anecdote from the entire book, my favorite story, which is about Lee Lance, who must be the most insightful fish importer in history, and how he turned the Patagonian fish into one of the most wildly popular dishes in America. And he did it not by, trying to build associations with that name. He did it by changing the very name of the product. So stopped calling it the Patagonian toothfish, started calling it the Chilean sea bass, and we see this explosion of sales for that particular fish. So it's a brilliant little anecdote to go along with the academic research.
So tons that we cover in the original podcast and much more depth and breadth as we get into the book. So coming up now is our replay of episode 3, how Häagen-Dazs used foreign branding to create a premium image. And remember, Hacking the Human Mind is coming out this September 30th, wherever books are sold. Reserve your copy now on pre-order at Amazon by searching Hacking the Human Mind. Thanks so much for your support. And now, happy listening. So welcome back to Behavioral Science for Brands podcast. I'm MichaelAaron.
I'm Richard Shotton.
And today we're talking umlauts, ice cream, and what's in a name. And we're going to use Häagen-Dazs as a brand that can really peel back the onion and show us some of these amazing behavioral science principles that's been so core to their success. So let's get started. So growing up, to me, the fanciest ice cream was always Häagen-Dazs. It stood apart from all other ice creams that you could walk down the freezer aisle and get, or even if you could be lucky enough to find a store. It was not Ben and Jerry's or all of these, good humor ice creams. It stood far and above as sophisticated and fancy. And I said to you, as we were getting ready for this podcast, that it was so sophisticated because it was international. It came with that aura of being such a sophisticated international brand. And then you shook me to my roots, Richard, when you told me what?
That it is an American brand.
Don't believe it.
Yeah.
Don't believe it.
It's set up in 1961 by Ruben Matus, an American of Polish origin. But like you, he associated Scandinavia, Denmark in particular, with sophistication. So he creates this brand name that basically implies it comes from Denmark. Häagen-Dazs itself is a completely made up set of words. But he calls it Häagen-Dazs. It sounds a bit Danish. He sticks an umlaut. It's over the A. That's a fiction. They don't do that in Denmark. He even sticks a map of Denmark onto the tub. Everything is about creating this association with Denmark. And that's clever because behavioral scientists argue our expectations of a product affect our experience. And words are one of the ways of creating that expectation. And so if you make it sound Danish, it has that aura of sophistication. And that will actually affect your experience of eating it.
So besides disillusioning me, you proved something for me personally, which was I don't think I even knew that umlauts weren't used over A's, but I took the brand's essence and core and it told me something that it was more premium. It told me that it was more sophisticated than a traditional American brand. They're tapping into something in sociology or psychology.
Yeah, I would call it expectancy theory. Our expectations influence the experience. And I think one of the great things about behavioral science is it's not just a logical argument. People aren't just using rationality to try and persuade you this is the case. There are experiments that back it up. So probably the most famous is a 2005 study by Brian Wansing at Cornell. Works with a cafeteria. And sometimes when people go in, they might be served chocolate pudding. Other people get exactly the same chocolate pudding. This is the same recipe, same batch, but it's called satin chocolate pudding. And then later on, those people are asked to rate the taste. And there is a statistically significant 7% improvement in the taste if it got the fancy label. So expectations that can be developed by a good piece of copywriting, a good name, have a genuine effect on our actual enjoyment of a product.
So, Richard, when you told me about Häagen-Dazs not being an American brand, my curiosity just went wild. I said, well, who else has used this tactic? And Atari, one of the biggest game consoles in the late 70s, 80s, and 90s, I always thought Japanese brand made because that's where the center of consumer electronics was at that time. Not true. The name itself is inspired by Japanese. It means to hit a target, but the rest of it made in Sunnyvale, California. The logo is meant to look like Mount Fuji, but nothing else about that brand is Japanese. And it got me thinking, the makers of Atari knew that for their brand to be successful, they should borrow the credibility of the Japanese excellence in consumer electronics, same way that Häagen-Dazs borrowed that credibility to make ice cream. So, these examples, Häagen-Dazs and Atari using what the industry would call foreign branding, may feel a little on the line in 2022. Was it appropriate to take another culture, use its superiority in an industry, and then take advantage of it for their own benefits? And I think we can all agree today, it may be viewed differently in 2022.
Yeah, I think these things feel amusing and acceptable when you're looking back 60 years. If a brand was making that decision now, probably a bit more dicey.
But lots to learn from it. I think the bigger question is there ethics and morals that we all have to be thinking about as we dive deeper into behavioral science?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it's an important one. My argument would be behavioral science is essentially neutral. It's just a tool.
Makes sense.
How you use that tool is a crucial thing. If you are using these tactics which boost the probability of persuading someone, if you're using them for good, absolutely fine. If you're using them in a way that is manipulative or the consumer wouldn't like that being done to them, then I think you have a bit of a problem. There's a brilliant bit, in fact, at the beginning of Richard Thaler's book, Nudge, where he talks about an American philosopher, John Rawls. And Rawls has this argument called the publicity principle. And essentially, I'm pretty sure it's the publicity principle, but essentially it's the argument that if someone knew you were doing this, would you feel embarrassed? So if someone knew that you were pretending to be Danish, would you be embarrassed? And I think that's a pretty good guide for running through any of these tactics. If you wouldn't want people to find out you're using them, then maybe you should leave them alone.
Inspired by the Bible, a good lesson for your kids, and a pretty smart way to do marketing. Yeah. Okay, so let's take a break, hear from our sponsors, and when we come back, we're going to dive deeper into this topic. Behavioral Science for Brands is brought to you today by Method One. Method One builds digital-first marketing systems to help brands grow. They're behavior change experts who solve business challenges by creating meaningful connections with consumers. With deep disciplines in many brand categories, reach out to them if you'd like to be leveraging behavioral science in your marketing or advertising. So using Häagen-Dazs as an example of foreign branding is instructive and it teaches us some things, but there's really a lot more to the Häagen-Dazs case study that we want to bring to table here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the bigger learning from them is probably what they did in the, was it late 80s, early 90s?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right.
So all the BBH advertising. What they did so brilliantly there was tap into an idea called price relativity. So they repositioned Häagen-Dazs as a very kind of adult, sexy, sensual product. And by splitting it away from the rest of the category, which was, childish, day-glow colours, stuff that you give to your kids.
Ice cream truck going down the street.
Exactly. They break that price comparison. Now, what's so interesting is a theme from behavioural science is when people think about how much a product is worth, they don't just weigh up the benefit they get from it and then the price. What's crucial is rather than that kind of absolute evaluation, they do it relatively. So what we're prepared to pay for something again and again is driven by what we compare it to. So Häagen-Dazs changing this kind of mental comparison set away from low value, cheap, childish brands suddenly allowed them to charge a much, much greater amount. Now, one of the great things about behavioral science is this is never empty theorizing. It's always based on
a study, on an experiment.
Exactly. And this, we have some data that we've done ourselves. So 404 Americans, we went out and said, look, here's some Ben & Jerry's. It costs $3.99. Here's some Walmart own label. It costs $1.99. How good's the Ben & Jerry's? How good value the Ben & Jerry's is? And 27% of people think it's very good value. Next group, same price Ben & Jerry's ice cream, same size tub, but this time we're comparing it to a $4.99 Halo top. It's exactly the same Ben & Jerry's, exactly the same price, but the proportion thinking it's very good value jumps by about 50%. It's now 42%. We are not weighing up quality and cost. We are comparing items to the easiest available alternatives. So if you as a brand can shift your mental comparison set, you can shift willingness to pay by orders of magnitude.
Another famous example of changing your comparison set is when Keurig invented K-Cups.
Oh, don't know this one.
And when Keurig first launched K-Cups, they said, how can we set the price so that we can make more money on each sale of a K-Cup than we could in a bag of ground coffee? So if you compare a bag of ground coffee, call it $4.99 at the grocery store, to how much coffee you get in a bag to how much coffee is in a K-Cup, a bag of coffee in K-Cups would cost like $150.
Yeah.
So what Keurig brilliantly did is they said, look, you can go to a Starbucks and pay $3.99 for a coffee, or you can get that same great cup of coffee from a Keurig K-Cup for only 60 cents. So they changed the comparison. Rather than the other coffees you can get at home and brew at home, which would be a few cents a cup, they compare themselves to going out to a store and getting it from a Starbucks or from a local barista. And in doing that, they change what their price is being compared to. Similar strategy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the point there is, that is a phenomenal order of magnitude in terms of what you've just changed consumers are prepared to pay. So you can take a well-known behavioural bias, price relativity is not a secret, apply it creatively to your brand, and you can make hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, this is a real commercial opportunity.
And one that stretches marketers to not just think, what's the ad campaign?
Yeah.
Instead, it's to say, what's the positioning of the product? How are we solving a consumer need in a bigger, broader way? And if we can change the dynamic that people think about our brand, we can change the profitability, we can change its success. Richard, we're talking serious behavioral science stuff here, but can we miss not asking your favorite type of ice cream?
Oh, easy,
what's your favorite ice cream?
A knobbly bobbly. I mean, everyone's favorite.
Translate it for us Americans here.
So it is an amazing ice cream. It's pretty hard to get hold of. It is the kids' ice cream on a lolly stick, and it is just kind of dunked into hundreds and thousands. That's covered in these 100,000 pieces. It's absolutely lovely. Best ice cream by far.
Pieces of chocolate?
Oh, no. Do you know, hundreds and thousands. They're like
no
bits of sugar, basically.
Aha.
Coloured sugar. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. And this is a treat that young British children can have.
Yeah, knobbly bobbly.
Knobbly bobbly. Well, of course, there we have it.
Yeah.
So, Richard, we always want to end our podcast with giving our marketers clear, quick hits on the most important things they should take away from today's talk.
Yeah. So 2 big things. The first is we experience what we expect to experience. We've been talking about how using adjectives can set up positive expectations, but it could be focusing on the serve, it could be focusing on the price. You as a marketer have to make sure when your customer experiences your product, you've set up those expectations to be as positive as possible. And then secondly, and I think this is the bigger idea, people do not weigh up prices in an absolute sense. It's a relative decision. So how can you change your consumer's mental comparison set? And if you do that, there is a phenomenal opportunity to increase revenue, increase the margin you're getting.
Excellent. And that brings us to the end of our show today. If you like what you heard, please give us a nice rating. Give us a nice review. We'd love to hear from you. My name's MichaelAaron Flicker.
And I'm Richard Shotton.
Hit us up at hello@theconsumerbehaviorlab.com. Let us know how you like the podcast, things you'd like us to cover. What's your favorite type of ice cream?